art and alchemy often go hand in hand. That's quite a big subject in a way. One way of explaining this is to say that alchemy is when we bring together this endeavor of studying what we observe. So that could be science. Science is all about the observed, what we can look at, what we can say about reality separate from the observer, which of course is a bit of a paradox in itself because there's no science that's done without the involvement of people. Then on the other side, you've got this notion of arts in society. That's like a first-person subjective experience. We're really interested in the observer and saying, well, what can the observer create? What comes out of exploring that space? And alchemy is really about bringing these two things together, the observer and the observed. Actually, it's about understanding that matter and consciousness are just two expressions of the same thing. And so historically, what you'll find is that there's a lovely symbiosis between alchemy and art. Actually, a lot of the most beautiful art that we have in Western culture comes from the Renaissance. It comes out of alchemy, because at the time they had to use allegory to communicate what they were teaching, because a lot of alchemists were persecuted for what they did. So one example of this is Michael Meyer, a Renaissance alchemist. He did a work called At Atlantifugians, and it's one of the world's first pieces of multimedia, because what it is it's a whole series of alchemical emblems, alchemical images, but there's a piece of music to accompany each image. So it's the first piece of multimedia. But what it's also depicting at different stages is alchemical works. It's depicting parts of the Emerald Tablet and things like that. And so for me, as an alchemist, I see that art and alchemy really go hand in hand. And actually, to take it another step further, I could talk a little bit about Jung and say that we all know that Jung contributed a lot to the world of psychology. He drew very heavily on alchemy to do that. Actually, he lifted a lot of terms from alchemy that were already there, and pretty much his view of psychology was largely founded on alchemy. But if we look at what Jung was teaching, for example, we see that symbols are the language of the unconscious, and symbols are also, you could argue, are the language of the artist. A visual artist uses symbols. A musical artist, we're kind of using symbols in a musical form to reflect a state or an emotional state. So Jung added a lot to that, and so I'd sort of say that when we're entering the world of symbols, which is the language of the soul, whether it's in art or in music or any of the arts, that's an alchemical journey. You can look at the journey of alchemy, and particularly the journey that the soul takes through different stages of transformation. This alchemical journey is symbolized. It's a journey through symbols. And so whenever we're making art, in its own way, it's an alchemical journey. Just like on this image here, we've got different stages of transformation all around the circle of being. So alchemy really is an art. And I'd also argue that any work of art in its own way is a work of alchemy, because again, you're using symbols in whatever form that is, whether it's visual or musical or whatever your art form is. You're using art to enact a change of state, a change of transformation. So you can really look at a lot of great works of art and see that they're actually works of alchemy in themselves. And if they're effective pieces of alchemy, they'll enact a change in a person. Think about psychodrama, think about ritual. I mean, in a way, there's an even closer relationship between ritual and art. A ritual is it's just a play, isn't it? It's just a series of actions. People embody certain characters, certain gods, certain energies. A ritual is sort of more like a play with a specific intent rather than just for entertainment. So there's lots of relationships there. And for me, music, that's a large part of what music is. It's very powerful at eliciting states of consciousness. And if I could say a little bit more, I'd also just go into talking about the music of the spheres. So of course, what a lot of people might not realize with music is that our Western musical system is, it's based largely on what Pythagoras found. And within every key signature, you have 7 modes. So, for example, Ionian is the first mode, and that's the most common one that people know. If you've got a scale from let's say C to C, da 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 da, that's Ionian mode. There are 6 other modes that exist within the C major scale, and it's the same within D major, E major, F major. There's always 7 modes. So each one of those modes actually corresponds to a god. So Ionian, which I just mentioned for example, is Venus. So whenever you're invoking a certain scale, you're also invoking a certain energy. You're invoking one of the gods, one of the 7 classical gods, 7 days of the week. 7's a very magical number in alchemy. So yeah, in this way music again can be treated not just as entertainment, it can also be a very powerful way of connecting with planetary archetypes. Yeah. I'm saying a lot.
That's great.